Hello, this is Alonso Bagadas, the Capital Naturalist, once again trying to get you guys prepped for Envirothon. Today we're going to talk about mounts. In particular, we're going to talk about waterfowl, what most people call, of course, ducks and geese and so forth. We're going to start with right over here what they call puddle ducks, and then we're going to move on to what they call diving ducks. Now, the typical puddle duck is what most people think about as far as the mallard and so forth. These are what they call dabbling ducks, which means when they feed, they mostly just reach down underneath the water with just their head, and then they dabble around so that they can find something to eat. These can usually take off straight off from the top of the water because their legs are set in the middle and they're very good flyers. They migrate just like most of the other ducks, although here in Virginia, we're home to a lot of different kinds of ducks that spend the winter with us. I mean, we have quite a few species of duck that spend the winter with us as well. So that's puddle ducks or dabbling ducks. And then, of course, we also have diving ducks. Diving ducks, their legs are set pretty far back, and they, of course, dive for their food. They go way underwater. Most of these, in order for them to fight, they need to patter or run along the top of the water so that they can take off. And that is one of the big differences between diving ducks, which dive for water, and their ability to take off. They have to take off into, you basically patter along the top of the water to get out there. All of the ducks like to fly into the wind. That helps them take off as well as to land. And we will also talk a little bit about grebes. This is the most common grebe. Grebes, or what they call sawbills, or a different kind of duck that we'll talk about later. And then finally, the most common type of thing that people see all the time are the Canada geese. So that's a short introduction. We'll be talking about waterfowl, everything from dabbling ducks or puddle ducks to diving ducks and everything in between. Quite a few species of ducks. We are just going to have to talk just about a few very common. So we're going to start off with the dabbling ducks, and the most common of all the dabbling ducks, those ducks that feed by dabbling, by just dipping their head underwater, don't usually dive or so forth, what they call puddle ducks, is the mallard. This is the most common bird. It's also what domestic ducks come from, most of them. It's found all over temperate zones, so all over North America. They're in Eurasia as well. They've been introduced in places like New Zealand because of domestic duck, all sorts of places down into South America again because it's been domesticated. So it's a very cool looking duck, again, very adaptable, can adapt to all sorts of different things, but also can breed with many kinds of birds, which is a problem. When they do breed, one way to tell them apart is that most of the time the males have this little feathers that pop up in the back, and that's a good way to tell when it's a male of something when it's been bred with a mallard, because they will breed with most other species of duck. So again, this is again a drake, what is called a male duck. The males are called drakes, and they're much more colorful than the females, which made good sense because the females want to be drab. They want to, when they're sitting in the nest, they want anybody to see them or anything like that. So this is a male. Mates with the female. The females nest on land, 8 to 13 eggs or so forth, common for them. They all hatch at the same time and they all come and follow the female and so forth. They nest on the ground. But again, this is the mallard duck, the most common of all the dabbling or puddle ducks, can take off straight up into the air. The mallard duck, the most common actually bird, I should say the waterfowl duck in the world, the mallard. Okay, so this is the black duck, Anas rubus. This is the largest of the paddle ducks, or what the puddle ducks, or what we call sometimes dabbling ducks. They're a little bit bigger than a common mallard that we have over here. Otherwise, they look a lot like a very drab-looking mallard. The male and the female look very much alike. This is the female, this is the male. The only difference is the female is kind of drab-looking. The male of the black duck is very colorful in its beak. Otherwise, they look exactly the same, a little darker, thus the name black duck. Best way of telling them if they're in the water is they have this, what they call a blue speculum, a blue colored wings on them, which is very different from like a mallard duck, which usually has blue covered with white. So this is more of a marsh type of bird. It likes more seawater. It's one of those that's in serious decline. Part of the reason is that unfortunately the mallard, which will mate just about any other kind of duck, is mating these guys out of existence. If you do see one, and you look at it and you see that if it's a male and it has this little curly little thing on the back, then it's a hybrid. It's actually one that has mated with this. But again, it is a dabbling duck, much like the mallard. It'll feed on all sorts of different kinds of things, everything from seed corn to aquatic plants. They will eat invertebrates. They especially like to eat invertebrates, at least the females do, during when they're about to nest, because they need all the protein, so they'll feed on all sorts of stuff. A bird of special, not a special concern, but one that people are worried about and protected much more. This is the black duck. So this right here is a green-winged teal. Again, it's kind of overall greenish kind of color, very neat little head and so forth. They're the smallest of all our dabbling ducks, a very, very small little bird. The female looks a lot like this, but again, very, very small. So smallest little dabbling duck that we have, it's actually fairly tolerant of cold winters, where a lot of the other teals and other kinds of smaller birds leave. This guy sticks around, oftentimes right next to it, things like mallards and other things feeding and so forth. So again, this is the green-winged teal, very small bird, the smallest of all little birds. They don't normally nest around here, but they stay with us most of the winter. And again, they usually breed a little bit further north than us. And they will stay with us all winter long, unlike many of the other ducks that fly back through. Some do stick around all year round, but most of the time you'll see most of these in the winter time. That's when they spend most of their time with us. This is the green-winged teal. Okay, so this is the black duck, Anis rubus. This is the largest of the paddle ducks, or with the puddle ducks, or what we call sometimes dabbling ducks. They're a little bit bigger than a common mallard that we have over here. Otherwise, they look a lot like a very drab-looking mallard. The male and the female look very much alike. This is the female, this is the male. The only difference is the female is kind of drab-looking. The male of the black duck is very colorful in its beak. Otherwise, they look exactly the same, a little darker, thus the name black duck. Best way of telling them if they're in the water is they have this, what they call a blue speculum, blue colored wings on them, which is very different from like a mallard duck, which usually has blue covered with white. So this is more of a marsh type of bird. It likes more seawater. It's one of those that's in serious decline. Part of the reason is that unfortunately the mallard, which will mate just about any other kind of duck, is mating these guys out of existence. If you do see one, and you look at it and you see that if it's a male and it has this little curly little thing on the back, and it's a hybrid, it's actually one that has mated with this. But again, it is a dabbling duck, much like the mallard. It'll feed on all sorts of different kinds of things, everything from seed corn to aquatic plants. They will eat invertebrates. They especially like to eat invertebrates, at least the females do, during when they're about to nest, because they need all the protein, so they'll feed on all sorts of stuff. A bird of special, not a special concern, but one that people are worried about and protected much more. This is the black duck. Yeah. Okay, so this is the blue-winged teal. Teals are small dabbling ducks or puddle ducks. This is a little bit larger than the green-winged teal. It's the very first birds to migrate out of here, and I've seen them all the way down in Costa Rica. So they're gone before September. Many have already left. You can easily tell the males because they have this blue, this little crescent, the little white stripe across the face. So it's easy to tell the males from everything else. Very fast-flying bird, early to leave. This is the blue-winged teal. Now, blue-winged teals are kind of interesting because in most birds, the blue that you see on them is because they're iridescent. This is one of the few birds where the blue on the wing is true blue. It's not something made up of the coloration where the iridescence where different light hits and it changes color. It's actually true blue. So the blue-winged teal, a very cool little bird, one of the ones that flies through here very, very quickly and is gone. So it's one of those that by September it's already migrating down into Central America. Blue-winged teal. Okay, so this is a pintail, what the hunters sometimes call sprigs. This is a very slender-looking duck, almost the same size as a mallard, slightly smaller, but again, much more delicate. A very fast-flying bird. A lot of them do spend the winter with us. Usually, you can see them like Huntley Meadows and so forth. This is a male, beautiful duck, very slender-looking. The females are much drabber, but again, you can tell that they're very skinny-looking, very slender, and that's part of it. They're called sprigs or pintails because the tails can be very, very long. This one's not as long as even some of the normal tails usually are. A fast-flying duck, a dabbler, a puddle duck that feeds on the surface in small groups, one that stays with us most of the winter, the pintail, the fastest flying of our dabbling or puddle ducks. Okay, so this is the gadwall, sometimes called the gray duck. Very neat little book. Again, looks very gray during most of its colors. Does have a black speculum as opposed to the blue and white of the male. This is just a black or something there. On the water, you can always tell that it has a black end to it. It's another way to tell them apart. Some people also call them squareheads. They can puff up their heads and they do look that way. This is a duck that used to be kind of unusual many, many years ago, but now, and they think maybe because of the range expansion and so forth, this duck is getting more and more common every year. So where it was a rarity 40 years ago is to see a gadwall around here, now more and more, especially if you get closer to open water, will you see gadwalls moving around. So again, the gadwall or the gray duck, this is the male, a beautiful little duck that's becoming much more common. Okay, so as we continue on, this is an unusual type of duck. It's what people call sawbills, okay, mergansers. Sawbills because they don't have the typical duck-like beak. This is much more slender and it's actually toothed in there. It's built for catching lots of food. This is a duck that dives underwater, sawbill, so it can hold on to its food. This is the most common of the ones we have in freshwater and one of the smallest. The hooded mergansers, again, they're called hooded because this little crest can raise way up and it's a beautiful little duck. They'll sit there and display to each other. Much more common in the wintertime, but we do have them nesting here in Virginia as well. It's a duck that can dive and catch all sorts of food, but unlike most mergansers that eat mostly fish, this guy will eat other things as well, which makes him considered a much more palatable duck as far as hunting and so forth is concerned. So a beautiful duck does great displays, bobbing its head and swimming around and so forth in shallow water, sometimes in small groups. The hooded merganser, this is a cavity nesting duck, so a lot of times when we put up boxes for things like wood ducks, this is one of the things that takes advantage of it. This is the hooded merganser. So this is the canvasback. This is a diving duck, and this is the largest of our divers. Diving ducks, again, as the name kind of suggests, they dive for food. They can go way underwater and catch whatever food that they want to under there. Most diving ducks feed on all sorts of aquatic life, fish, mussels, things like that. This is slightly different. The canvasback, its scientific name has to do with Vallisneria. It actually has to do with wild celery. That's what it feeds on the most. So for that reason, unlike most diving ducks, which are considered poor eating, they taste fishy, people don't like them, this was a favorite one for hunters to actually get. It's one of the fastest of all of our ducks. It's a very, very fast type of duck. It's the largest diving duck we have. It's easily told even by its profile in the water because males and females have this sloped head that other ducks don't, and so it's easy to tell this apart from all the other ones. The name is kind of interesting. The canvasback, why did they call it that? Some people think that this was a popular bird for the market hunters. They would collect them and so forth. And the story goes that they put them all in a bag and they wanted the canvasback so they can get them back to be able to load them back up with ducks. And so they write under canvasback. And people thought that supposedly that meant that that was the animal that was in there. A very popular duck. Since wild celery has been starting to disappear in many of our areas, this has started to feed on all sorts of other things. It will feed on shells and so forth. And some of the people who used to eat these kinds of things say that those now ducks don't taste as good. But luckily, wild celery is making a comeback, and along with it, so are these. This, most often than not, there's way more males than females. It's a duck that doesn't nest here. It doesn't nest up north. But it does spend the winters with us, oftentimes in shallow water where it dives down to get its wild celery and other types of things. The canvasback, our heaviest diving duck and also one of our fastest. Okay, so this is another diving duck. Again, it feeds by diving underwater to get them. This is the redhead duck, the aptly named because again, the males do have that red look to them. Sometimes a very colorful bill. This is an interesting duck, a medium-sized duck that again does go underwater. It's also unusual because ducks do sometimes lay their eggs in other ducks' nests, but this one carries it to the extreme. This is what you might be able to call a parasitic duck. It lays its eggs all the time in other ducks' nests, in particular things like canvasback and whatever, so that it lays its eggs, abandons the eggs there, and then the other female has to raise them. Works sometimes, doesn't work in others, but again, a diving duck nests up north, does come down and spends the winters and so forth with us, oftentimes likes a little bit more brackish water. A fast-looking duck looks a little bit like a canvasback, but again, much more rounded head, not the slope that that guy has. Colorful bill when it's in breeding season. The redhead duck, a parasitic duck that we still have that will spend the winters and so forth with us. So here's another one of our diving ducks. This is one of the smallest of all of our diving ducks. This is the bufflehead. Bufflehead because of the big fat head that can sometimes raise its crest and so forth. Sometimes called butterballs because they feed mostly on fish and things like that, so they're not considered very edible. So the only way you can eat them is with a pound of butter, and because they weigh about a pound too. So this is the butterball. This is the male. This is the female. As you can tell in here, they do nest in cavities. Not here, mostly up north. They do spend the winters and so forth with us. But up north, they do look for holes in trees, and that's where this cavity nesting bird lays its eggs, for the little female. And again, both males and females, they're very good divers. If you look out in the water, sometimes they're, sometimes they're not. Very hard to get pictures of, because every time they see you, they jump underwater. This is the bufflehead. Again, the male, and the much grabber looking female, easily confused with some other things, but again, look at the white is underneath the eye, which is very important to separate with some of the other ducks, the bufflehead or the butterball. So this is a Canada goose, Branta canadensis. There's a lot of different races. Around here, we have the migratory ones like this one that migrate through. We also have resident ones that stay all year round. They're a little bit bigger than this one. But again, they're all the same they're all the same species, just a different race. The resident geese are a little head taller than this. This is the Canada goose that migrates through here. Again, this is the example of a migratory bird. Now, the resident geese, they never learn how to migrate, they were released and so forth. But these are migratory birds. They nest up in Canada, come through here, they come down all the way down North Carolina, places like that, any place where there's unfrozen land. They'll come and feed on the ground, eating all old fields, corns and things like that, but they'll also feed in the water. By dabbling around, and because they have very good insulation, they will oftentimes break holes in the water so they can feed and so forth. They usually just tip over and reach down to the bottom with these big long neck. They can do that. It's a large goose as far as gooses are concerned, specifically the resident ones. The Canada goose, one interesting story to tell about it is that way back when the people that lived here in Virginia, and particularly Algonquian-speaking Indians, things like the Powhans and so forth, they used to have several different seasons, 5 different seasons, one of which was called Cahonks. And the reason they called it Cahonks is they could tell it was that season because they could hear the cahonk of the Canada geese coming through. And they knew then that that season was starting, the season of migrating birds. So this is the Canada goose.